What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Over Analysis. Today we're talking about some of my favorite deep sleepers. These are guys that probably aren't even going to be drafted in most of your redraft leagues. However, these are all guys that I think carry significant upsides that I think are worth taking shots on in the final rounds of your draft. First guy we're going to go over is Terrence Ferguson of the Rams. Ferguson was a second-round pick of the Rams last season, and he spent most of his rookie year buried on the Rams depth chart behind guys like Tyler Higbee, Colby Parkinson, but he did get some action late in the season that made him a popular breakout candidate before the draft when the Rams added yet another tight end when they took Max Clare. And when the Rams spent that second-round pick on Clare this year, the stock for Ferguson just tanked. Right now, he's currently got around 17 ADP, which means that in most 12-team leagues that draft 16 rounds, he's not being drafted at the moment. Ferguson, however, has gotten some really positive reports coming out of Rams camp. The Rams are expanding his route tree, and there's a chance here that in his second year, he could be the one among this crowded tight end room that really gets some separation and establishes himself as one of the more important targets in this Rams offense. So especially if you're going for a late tight end strategy, I think Ferguson is a great option to pair with somebody like Okonkwo or AJ Barner at the tail end of your draft. Next guy on my deep sleeper list is Tre Harris of the Chargers. Harris was a second-round pick a year ago, and while he's in a crowded Chargers passing game, he does have a good chance to separate himself a bit from that pack, mostly because he's a very willing blocker, and it's something that head coach Mike McDaniel has already praised him for quite a bit during training camp. We know that Mike McDaniel is going to want to run the football a ton, and it's going to be important for him to have guys out there that he's confident in that are going to do the job blocking-wise. And if Harris is a willing blocker, then he's already going to have a leg up on the rest of the wide receivers in terms of how many snaps he's going to get. But then you add in, keep in mind, he was a second-round pick just a year ago. He's got a 6'3" frame. He's very versatile. He can create explosive plays. So this is a guy that McDaniel can take advantage of in the passing game as well as use in the running game as well. The fact that he can do both just makes it so it's going to be a lot less predictable what the offense is going to do when he's out on the field. So again, when we're looking at guys that are deep sleepers, this is a guy in Tre Harris who has draft capital tied to his name, that is going to be on the field a decent amount, that is tied to an explosive offense. These are all recipes for a guy that could break out in his second year that you can currently get beyond the 16th round of your drafts. And again, just think about cost for a second here. Would you rather spend a pick inside the top 10 rounds on a guy like Quentin Johnston, who we've already seen is very volatile, or would you rather spend an even later round pick on a guy like Tre Harris, who was a second round pick just a year ago that has gotten praise in training camp and has a good chance to be on the field a lot? I'll take the end of the draft swing on a guy like Tre Harris over an earlier round pick on a guy like Quentin Johnston every day of the week. Next guy we'll talk about is JaKobi Lane of the Baltimore Ravens. JaKobi Lane, a third-round pick of the Ravens this year, comes in with a 6'4" frame. He models his game after Michael Thomas, the former great NFL wide receiver, and he's been turning heads all throughout training camp. And when you talk about JaKobi Lane's chance to make an impact in fantasy this year, first you have to consider what his path to playing time is right now. At the moment, the only thing that's standing in the way of JaKobi Lane in a starting role in the Ravens offense is a guy like Rashad Bateman, a guy that's been underwhelming and been a failure for every year of his career. Also consider that new offensive coordinator Declan Doyle, who comes from the Ben Johnson tree, had a hand in the selecting of JaKobi Lane in the draft this year. So now let's go back to the Chicago Bears last season and take a look at how they handled some of their high rookie picks, Colston Loveland and Luther Burden. While those two were brought along slowly, they weren't unleashed right away. By the time the season ended, these guys both had prominent roles in the Bears offense. We could be seeing something similar like that for JaKobi Lane if Declan Doyle follows the roadmap that Ben Johnson laid out for him a year ago. Also keep in mind that Rashad Bateman could possibly be traded before the end of training camp. There's at least one report that the Houston Texans reached out about Bateman after Jaden Higgins went down with his torn ACL. So, in the event that the Ravens were to move on from Bateman before the end of the preseason, then that alone would also cause Lane's value to skyrocket. Next guy on my list is Chris Bell of the Miami Dolphins. And Bell apparently is a lot further along than any of us thought he was in the recovery from his injury. Just the fact that he's out there practicing already and getting ready to play in preseason games is a great sign for him. We all know that there's opportunity in this wide receiver room for someone to step up and be fantasy relevant, whether that's Chris Bell, whether that's Caleb Douglas, whether that's Kevin Coleman, any of these rookie wide receivers that the Dolphins drafted. There's opportunity here for somebody to be decent. Chris Bell is the most talented of the three, and if he's healthy, then I think he's got the best chance of this group to separate himself from this receiver room and be fantasy relevant for us as the year goes on. Final guy that we'll go over today is Dontayvion Wicks of the Philadelphia Eagles. Dontayvion Wicks was a guy that, when he was with the Packers, always was a trendy sleeper pick for fantasy football, but he was never able to put it all together out in Green Bay. Plain and simple, he just struggled with drops. Also, the Packers had a really crowded receiver room for years. Wicks was in a mix with himself, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, so it was very hard for him to earn regular playing time. Now in Philadelphia, Wicks has had a very strong training camp, and it looks like he's going to open up the season as the guy out next to Devontae Smith in 2 wide receiver sets. First round pick Mekhi Lemon has been bothered by a hamstring injury and has barely practiced all throughout training camp. He's really falling behind right now, and it's going to take some time before he's able to really ramp up and play his way into a larger role to start the year. And so the opportunity is going to be there for Wicks to have a larger role right out of the gate. And the Eagles do like Wicks quite a bit, keep in mind. Not only did they give up draft picks to get him, but they also gave him a contract extension with a pretty good amount of guaranteed money tied to it. And that's going to do it for this one, guys. So again, these are just a handful of deep sleepers that aren't even being drafted right now, that if nothing else, even if you don't draft them yourselves, I would at least add these guys to your watch lists. And keep in mind, with all these players that we talked about today, these are all guys that are tied to very good offenses. They're guys that are not only tied to good offenses, but have a pathway in front of them where they could find themselves in larger roles on these good offenses as the season goes along. And again, even if you don't necessarily use your late round picks on these guys for the last spot or two on your bench, these are names that you just want to be aware of and keep in mind as we get more and more reports out of training camp and practice. But I thank you guys again so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content today, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. And we will talk to you next time when we go over whose stock has been rising and falling during the first few weeks of the preseason.